Thank you and welcome to this conversation between myself, Helle Sewell, and Reverend Dr. Roger Walton. Now, Roger is a very experienced person because he's been a chair of district, he's been a president and a principal at a college. He's also an author of a couple of books, and in the last 2 years, he's been working with a team of people on a way of life, and the Methodist Way of Life is kind of developing from that. So I'm very excited for this interview, and hopefully through this, you're able to become better informed on what Methodist Way of Life is and has to offer. Now, in the Darlington district, we have already started an online consultation on Methodist Way of Life, and we're hoping this will continue as we seek to develop Methodist Way of Life over the next few years. So Roger, would you start us off by kind of telling us what is the Methodist Way of Life?
Okay, so Methodist Way of Life is a way of living. It's a way of living your life in the world, which is helped by a simple rule of life. And a kind of rule of life is a set of practices that we aspire to, that we express our Christian faith, the way we live in the world to show that we're followers of Jesus. Now, it's kind of draws on our calling, which will be very familiar to people in the Methodist Church, been around since the year 2000, very widely used and accepted. And it tells us that we're responding to God's love, and we're doing that through 4 patterns: through worship, through learning and caring, through service, and through evangelism. That's the way the Methodist Church is called to live in the 21st century. And this way of life helps people to kind of, in a sense, locate that in their own spirituality, in their everyday practices. And it has a set of questions with it, which are for reflection. The questions sit alongside, as it were, the commitments, and kind of ask you to reflect on where you are and what you're doing. So, for example, in the worship section, it says we'll pray every day, we'll worship with others regularly, we'll look and listen for God. And the questions are to say to us, well, what's happening in your prayer life? What's the pattern? How easy or hard is it? When have you sensed God, or has God felt distant? And so the questions are for us to reflect and actually ideally to share with other people, so we can talk honestly with other people about the joys, the blessings, but also the struggles of our spiritual life.
Well, the Methodist Way of Life focuses upon accountable discipleship and draws upon deep wells of Christian practice, which is old and new. Could you tell us a little about how these rich traditions have influenced the development of Methodist Way of Life?
Okay, so I think most people will know that early Methodism put a great deal of emphasis on small groups. Some of the early ones were called bands, and then the class meeting became the way in which everybody who belonged to a Methodist society belonged. So they belonged to the small group, to the class, as part of the society, and then eventually the church that they were part of. And these small groups were intended to help people make the spiritual journey. So it was a place where you could be honest about where you were, the things that had blessed you and helped you, the things that you were struggling with, where you kind of missed the mark, and so on. And others were there to kind of listen, to pray, to support, sometimes to give a bit of encouragement and advice, but largely to create a place where you could kind of get to grips with your own spiritual journey. And I think we wanted to kind of get hold of the essence of that. So I don't think we will see the class meetings again. They were of their time. But there is, I think, for us something really important about being intentional about our spiritual journey and being willing to account to others for the journey that we're taking and how it's going, so that others can pray and support us, and we can pray and support them on the journey, because that kind of journey is often very demanding and not easy. So we do need the help that we can get, and I think in that sense it's informed who we are. And those kind of house groups and small groups and cell groups that have come a long time are kind of other expressions of that same kind of thing. This is in line with that and wants to make use of that.
So Roger, would you be able to tell us why now? Why at this point on our journey do you think Methodist way of life is important for the Methodist Church?
Okay, there's kind of big picture and small picture here. So the big picture is that we are towards the end of Christendom. Now, Christendom's that kind of alliance between state and church, which has gone on almost since Constantine became the first Christian emperor, when the state kind of put its weight behind the church, sometimes for very negative outcomes, sometimes for good. But what's happened in those, kind of most of 1700 years or so, in Europe in particular, is that the state has been shaped with the church in telling people how to be Christian. So I grew up in a non-Christian family, and we didn't go to church. But we knew that you should go to church on Sunday because the shops were closed, because the churches were open, so that whether you were a believer or not a believer, you knew that people should go to church on Sunday. And for many people, that was a way of knowing what it meant to be Christian. You went to church on Sunday, you went to a worship service, and then you had the festivals where there were public holidays, and wit walks were part of it at one stage, and those occasions which were ordained by the state told you a lot about what it meant to be Christian. Now that's been disappearing. I mean, for the last 100 years it's been disappearing, and it will disappear even more. Sunday is not a non-trading day now. In fact, more people go shopping than almost anything else on Sundays. So that's gone, and some of the festivals, special times of the year have gone. Christmas stays on because it actually works in with a commercial thing. But I think not many people now outside the church know when Pentecost is or what Pentecost is about. And I think Easter might even go in that direction too if schools reorganize how they teach. So when you haven't got those things outside which tell you how it is to be Christian, you need to know inside. You need to know in your own practices. So a way of life, a rule of life, it is a way of saying this is what it means to live as a Christian. We live like this, and then so that's the kind of now on the big picture that we need to be addressing this in terms of expressing our own identity as followers of Christ, not expecting the state to tell us how to do that. But the small picture, I suppose, is the recent COVID picture. That we've not been able to go to our church buildings, and even when we've gone back, is a very different experience of worship. I took a service on Sunday, I had to wear a face shield, and there were about 20 people in the congregation, all spaced about, and but for many people that's not been possible at all, and some people are very hesitant about going back into a church building for kind of good reasons, really. And I think that it somehow told us that things that we think express our identity, so going to church, worshipping in a certain way, are not the whole thing. In fact, they may be things that change over time quite radically. So, but what's at the heart of it? And what's at the heart of it is praying, worshipping in some way, challenging injustice, sharing our faith, practicing hospitality. These are the things that are in Methodist way of life. These express who we are. And I think we ought to do that now, in this changing world where Christendom is disappearing and where COVID-19 has told us that we're going to have to be different.
So finally, could you share with us some stories about how Methodist way of life might look like in practice at an individual or a small group or a congregational level?
Yeah, so a couple of things that might be useful. The first is that because Yorkshire West had a go at this as a sort of pilot, we didn't give people too many instructions about what they had to do. We just simply shared this, and a lot of people took them, and many people set up small groups, so 3 or 4 people at most, sometimes even 2, and they set up meetings once a month, and once a month they come together and they look at one of the questions and say, you know, well, how, and each person would share a little bit about where they were in relation to that question and what was happening in their life. Then they pray for each other, and then they, you know, fix to meet in a month's time and look at another question. So that now lots of groups have set up across the country like that during this year, in 3s and 4s, occasionally in 2s, for that kind of sharing. Now, I think that's quite a good expression of it, and I think for many people, you know, to have a prayer partner or a prayer triplet it is a real help, and it's a good place to use this. But it's not the kind of only place. Lots of other ways in which it can be used. So in the congregational setting, it's quite a good thing to say together as a group. So last Sunday I preached a short sermon, and then we said the way of life together as way of responding, saying this is the people of God, this is what it means to be the people of God. And one group I knew in Burley and Wharfdale, they're small groups, which there are about a dozen, end there every time they meet. They might meet about studying a book or doing any other thing, but at the end of when they meet, they say together the way of life, because as they go out, they're saying, this is what we're going to be like in the world. We're going to live like this. So there's that. There's also the whole business of kind of sharing who we are, really. So lots of people say, well, you know, what are Methodists about? What is it they believe? How are they different? And that, I think it's quite a good thing to say to them, well, this is what we're about. Give them a way of life. Say, this is how we try to live our lives. You know, we this is what we believe is important for the transformation of the world. And so I mean, I think it could be used like that. I think there are other things, and we're preparing a number of resources which are going to be available across this autumn. So the sermon series around each of the commitments, that's going to go onto the website in the autumn as study material, video material, and they can be used in a variety of ways within the life of the church. I think the other thing that's interesting is that some of the new communities that are emerging from our church, you know, sometimes we call them fresh expressions, pioneer communities, and so on. These new patterns of being a Christian community are often using the way of life or something very similar to it as a way of focusing their community's life. This is the people we're about, and so they will say it together, they will talk about it together, they will explore what it means together, in order to sustain their sense of calling to mission and ministry in their locality.
Well, that's it. I mean, thank you, Roger, for your grace and willingness to come and share with us. And we really appreciate your passion and enthusiasm for this. And I mean, we're really enthusiastic in Darlington District as well to take this forward. If anyone has any questions or further comments, then please do not hesitate to get in touch with me, and you can find my email address on the district website. But this concludes our interview. Thank you and goodbye.